comes to your door, mostly a lot of deportation and defense. Oftentimes, students come here and they don't have their finances all together.
Students committing so many small crimes, shoplifting, and then he was proven not guilty.
If you need to go out to drink and have fun with your friends, Congress just passed that. 180 days overstay is almost like a ban.
There were like a bunch of people.
Or you could get married to a US citizen. Go get your MBA, go back to India.
If you come to USA through L1 visa,
Yes.
they file it on EB1.
Based on the lawsuits, because, some of the students, but for Indians or India and China, I think you guys are backlogged.
They type their immigration issues directly in our text messages.
If you've never been in a court proceedings before,
Okay, and any other visas like this?
so there's the U visa,
He's not working there legally. He's a victim of a crime.
and you have to prove that you've been persecuted by your government.
End of the day, it's a nightmare for Indian national to get a green card. Hi, welcome to MAAB Talks. Today we have Cindy Paul in our studio. She has over 22 years of legal experience. Let's get to know about multiple visa types and about US immigration. MAAB Talks is not part of any law firm and we are not promoting any attorney offices. This is just for informational purposes. So let's get into the show. Hi Cindy, welcome to MAAB Talks.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, so let's get to know a little bit about you. So
Sure.
where are you from and then when did you come to USA?
Okay, so I was born in the island of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
My parents immigrated here when I was about 14 years old.
Okay.
And I stayed back with my grandparents for a little bit. I finished high school in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
So I came here at the age of 16 years old.
Oh, okay.
And then I started college here and I went to Rutgers University.
Okay.
And then after Rutgers University, I went to Rutgers Law School.
Okay.
And so that was my journey, educational journey in the United States.
Okay. Okay. And then tell us a little bit about your career. Like, how did you get into immigration law and all?
So I wasn't always an immigration lawyer. I
Okay.
started off being a public defender.
Okay.
I worked in as with the public defender's office in the state of North Carolina.
Mhm.
I represented indigents in all kinds of criminal activities,
Oh.
and so that was a very interesting learning experience for me.
Okay.
And then much later, when I returned to New Jersey, I got into immigration law. That was about 2 years later. I came back to New Jersey because I went to North Carolina in 2003, started working for the Fayetteville Public Defender's Office, worked there until about 2004,
Okay.
returned to New Jersey in 2006,
Okay.
and then began working in immigration law thereafter.
Okay.
So I first started doing per diems for a lot of attorneys, taking cases, family-based cases, doing naturalization cases, doing some other pro bono stuff, and that's how I began
Yeah.
my work in immigration. Yes.
Okay. And at this point, what's your major concentration on? Like,
So right now, I really focus on family immigration law,
okay.
and I do some humanitarian work, and I do a little bit of general business work and some mostly a lot of deportation and defense, deportation and removal defense.
Oh, that's the biggest thing we need
Yes,
these days,
yes.
right? Yeah.
That's kind of the crux of what's happening now.
I know.
So
Yeah.
we're in the midst of all of that. So
Yeah.
that's been quite that's kept us quite busy.
Okay. Yeah. Let's get into F1 visas. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to see what do students applying for F1 visa, what do they need to be ready at this given point of time in 2025?
Yeah, I think it's important for people and kids outside of the United States to plan carefully when they're applying for their F1.
Mhm.
Firstly, you look at the schools. Make sure that the schools and your courses that you're picking align with your degrees or with your tract of studies in whatever country you're coming from.
Okay.
Secondly, make sure you have the financial wherewithal to study and to be focused on your study while you're in the United States.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, students come here and they don't have their finances all together, so they have to start doing odd jobs
Yes.
to make up and pay for the differences.
Mhm.
Now, this affects them in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Their studies, but more importantly, it's a violation of the law.
Yeah.
And that, under this administration, will basically cause them to lose their status. So
Okay.
I think people have to be very mindful when they plan their career, the things that they want to study, how they plan to pay for that study,
Mhm.
and think about, talk to other students, the realities of living. So if you plan to live in the East Coast, talk about the cost of living,
Mm.
talk about transportation, talk about, just general things like that.
Yeah.
West Coast, same thing. Or if you in another part of the United States, because cost of living varies, right?
Exactly.
So they have to be aware of that.
Yeah, because they don't estimate how much it's gonna cost at certain points, and then they come here and then they realize how hard is it, and they have to make money on one side. They don't
Absolutely.
plan their immigration right because they make decisions. One decision will lead to other decision, and then by the time they graduate, they'll not be fully prepared. They don't get a right job, and then it starts piling up.
Yeah.
Everything
It just
starts.
it's spiral downwards after
Yeah.
that. So it's really, really very important. And some schools are obviously more expensive than other schools. And students don't really get a lot of financial assistance other than scholarships.
Yeah.
So you have to be mindful, if you are getting a scholarships, what do you need to keep the scholarship? Because if your grades go down
Mm-hmm.
below a certain level, in some schools they will take away that scholarship.
Exactly.
So you have to be mindful. If you're coming here, let's say on a 100% scholarship, be mindful. You need the scholarships to stay in school,
Yeah.
because otherwise you're not going to be able to afford. Or if you can afford, make sure you have that backup plan.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to underestimate than to overestimate. I would say try to overestimate the cost of everything and plan accordingly with your family before you make the transition.
Okay. Okay. So, what does staying in status means? Like, what do you think? So, because like I see like students committing so many, like not everyone, but we keep seeing some cases
Yeah.
where they commit small crimes, shoplifting. Sometimes they might work somewhere where they're not supposed to work. There are like
Right.
so many
Right.
other things. Sometimes DUI or anything.
Yeah.
So
I think more importantly, students, once they get here, remember what your goals are. You're not here to party. Well, you can party, but be careful. Be wary of what you do, because there's if anything happens and there's a criminal consequence, it's going to affect your visa. So I think it's important for you to follow the rules. Go to school as required. Take the amount of courses that your school requires you to take. Try not to work, because you're not allowed to work, as a student generally, unless
Yes.
you have CPT or you move on to OPT.
yeah.
Right? So try not to do that.
Mhm.
Definitely try not to work outside of campus
Mhm.
and some odd job
Yes.
somewhere earning
Yeah.
a couple of bucks,
Yeah.
because that's the worst thing that you could do for your career,
Yeah,
essentially.
exactly.
That's sabotaging your
Yeah,
career in so many
yeah.
ways, right? So stay in status, follow the rules of the school, make sure you study so you keep your academics up.
Mhm.
You get the grades that you need to keep, to keep in status, so you don't have issues with the college.
Yes.
Right? So, and as long as you do that, for example, and another thing too, it's okay to do and have a social life and all of that, but be mindful.
Mm.
We have laws in this country,
Yeah.
and you're here as a guest. You're here on, this is a privilege to be here.
True.
So
True.
don't take that for granted.
Yeah.
Drive, if you need to go out to drink and have fun with your friends, take an Uber.
Mm.
Be responsible.
Yeah.
So that's basically what I would say.
And being with the right group of people
Absolutely.
is also a very important thing.
Yeah.
And
The right group of friends.
yes.
Make sure someone decides, I'm going to stay sober while everyone parties out.
Parties
because
out,
I'm
yeah.
the driver tonight.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
that's what I did when I was in college,
True. Yeah.
Many nights I was a designated driver and
Yeah.
I was dropping people off at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
So, hey, I get it. Like, we're here to enjoy. We're away for the first time out of our country, away from our parents. We want to experience life. That is normal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But just be mindful of what you're
Exactly.
doing.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Me, I look from my Instagram handle. I keep looking at so many cases where I saw this shoplifting incidents and all that. Students feel like in India, back in India, like if you have to go to a store or something, you have to show your receipt before going out. And right now, even in USA, we see that a lot.
Yeah.
But certain like few years back, it used to be like very liberal. Like so, people used to feel like no one is checking us. it's okay to just take one item or something like that, and then
Yeah,
they get
yeah.
caught, and then okay, so something like this happens. What do they need to do at that point? Like, say, not only this, a DUI, anything.
Yeah.
What's their next
Yeah.
step?
Well, committing any crime or
Yes,
violating the
ma'am.
law has serious consequences to it,
Yes.
right? So, stealing particularly, now we know that, there's a Lake and Riley Act.
Mhm.
So the government just put that out, and Congress just passed that, like, I think a couple of months ago, where if you're caught stealing, misdemeanor theft,
Mhm.
shoplifting, or stealing, you're going to be subject to mandatory detention. What
Mm.
does that mean? You go into a store, you pick up a few things, security catches you, they call the police, you're
Yes.
arrested.
Yeah.
ICE is going to come and take you. That's
Yeah.
what that means.
Yeah.
Once ICE puts you into detention, you have no bond. You're not eligible for bond because under the Lake and Riley,
Mhm.
anyone who's subject or who's been basically even not even convicted, you
Mhm.
just have to be charged with the
Yeah.
crime.
Yeah.
You'll be subject to mandatory detention. So please
Please not do that.
do not
Do that.
engage in
Mm.
breaking any laws while you're here,
Yeah.
because I think from a moral perspective we all know what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're smart enough to come here on a student visa, you know that stealing is wrong,
True. Yeah.
or driving while drunk is wrong.
Yes.
Maybe sometimes some of these things are it's more liberal in India or in any other country,
Mhm.
but in the United States, be mindful that you're here as a student, a
Yes.
non-immigrant visa.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you are extra cautious
Mhm.
about everything, all the steps that you take to not break or violate any laws in any way.
Yeah. I saw one case where a person was like they caught him saying that for some crime like shoplifting, I don't know what the case was,
Right,
and then he was proven not guilty.
right.
And then in recent they have detained few people, right?
Yeah.
His name was on that.
Yes.
So he was like, I was proven to be non-guilty, but like still they did that to him. I don't know how he handled that situation at that point, but yeah, we never know how it's gonna come back. Yeah.
So usually, I would say if you get into trouble, hire a criminal defense attorney right away.
Yeah.
Make sure that you can get that charge dismissed, because like, let's say for something like a shoplifting, mandatory detention, or a DUI, you can lose your visa status, things like that.
Mhm.
Hire immigration attorney. I mean, and a criminal defense attorney, both, because you
Mm.
need
Both,
to counseling from both,
Yeah.
right? But recently, with what you're talking about, we know that this administration has basically sort of been cracking down on students and their
Yes.
violations.
Yes.
And so many of these students, even if they were, found not guilty,
guilty.
were also flagged. So if you
Mm.
had any contact with the justice system, if your prints were in the system,
Exactly.
you were flagged.
Yes.
Right? A
Yes.
dismissal is good because it means that for all intents and purposes, you didn't commit a crime, right?
Yeah.
That's how the law should view it.
Mm.
But the administration took it upon itself
Mhm.
to say that we're gonna basically, terminate all these kids who were arrested, even if it was convicted or not convicted or
Yeah.
discharged, or they had some other type of a plea agreement.
Yes.
But we know now that they have, I guess, changed their position,
Yeah.
and that has been changed, and now these students have been reinstated.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
based on the lawsuits, because some of the students who didn't have criminal charges were also basically taken off this SEVA system,
Exactly.
and so they filed collective lawsuits or class action
Mm.
lawsuits, and so this spiraled across the country, causing the government, or basically pushing the government,
Mm.
to step back and change its position as
Mm.
far as the termination of SEVAs.
Yeah.
So the policy. So now, thanks to these lawsuits, the students were again reinstated.
Reinstated,
Yes,
and they could
all
come
of
back.
them.
Yeah. There were like a bunch of people who felt like we have to leave the country,
Yeah,
and then they felt like they saw something online and they felt like we have to leave the country. They went back, and then the government like reinstated it,
Yeah.
and then they cannot come back now, and they left, and they felt really, I mean, they lost everything now because they cannot
it's
come back.
really unfair.
Yeah.
It's extremely unfair. But see, again, they don't really have any rights
Mm.
being outside the country.
Yeah.
and being basically a non-immigrant in the United
Yeah.
States, right?
Yes.
You're here as a a privilege,
Mhm.
essentially.
True.
So if they were to go back and try to maybe reapply for their student status, reinstate, it's going to be extremely difficult, especially under this administration. We know what the take is on anyone who's ever been arrested, and what the take is on students. And now we know that student visas have been paused,
Yeah.
across the globe.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going to happen? But it's really unfair, and I agree
Yeah.
with you.
And
They
even
have no recourse in courts.
right. And I feel like even students and people who
Mhm.
are watching this should be, they have to talk to a attorney before taking decisions like that, rather than looking at something online. Spend some money, like $1,000, 2,000, whatever
Yeah.
it takes. Spend it on that. It might differ case to case. They take, like, generic advice, and then even if
And
we
act on
say
it.
something, they don't. This is a generic advice.
Yeah, yeah.
So they take it seriously, but their case might be completely different.
Yeah.
Right.
So you see, like, this was a class action. This
Mhm.
this happened to I don't know the exact number of students. Was it something like in thousands, right?
I don't know the exact number
But
either.
it was in
Yeah.
thousands
Yeah.
across the country from various universities. So
Yeah.
it wasn't specific to them.
Exactly.
It was the government.
Mhm.
So yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Before taking the decision to leave
Mhm.
without talking to an attorney was probably the worst thing that they did.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
now they sabotaged their entire career. They lost. I mean, I'm not sure about how they would transfer credits back to any other country or how that would work for them.
Yeah.
But
They must have lost a lot of money.
a lot
too.
of money, because how far were they along in their
Exactly,
studies,
yeah.
and what happened. And so
Yeah.
that was just jumping to a conclusion really too quick.
Too quick.
So
Yeah.
sometimes don't do anything. The best thing to do is do nothing
Exactly.
and just wait
Wait.
and talk to the right people, because it took a couple of weeks for people to start filing class actions,
Yeah.
for lawyers to even become aware
Mhm.
of what was happening. I
Yeah.
wasn't aware until like 2 weeks later. I thought it was a scam when one student told me he got this notice from. I was like, no, that's a scam. That doesn't seem like. But
Alright.
then when multiple students start calling and asking for advice, I'm like, wait a second. I had to step back and
Something.
say, something's up. This
Yes,
is not
yes,
a
yes,
scam.
yeah. It's
And this is
serious.
really coming from the
Mm,
government,
mm.
until I actually had to call one of the schools, and then I got like, yeah, we were instructed to do this.
Oh.
So that's how I realized it was happening across the board. But I think it's in the thousands,
Okay.
basically, of how many students were affected. And thankfully, the government, rolled back on their position with that. So
That's a good thing.
it's a good
Yeah,
thing.
it's a good thing,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And coming to other thing, so regarding the visas and everything, for it might be for H1B or F1 or any status. These days they're looking at their social media, what they're posting. Are they like
Supporting
supporting
Palestine?
Yes, exactly. Supporting any groups like that.
Yeah.
And I often see people, we as an Instagram, I have an Instagram handle. There are like 10 to 15 of
Mhm.
them, where NRIs and people who speak Telugu, they follow our pages.
Mm-hmm.
They type their immigration issues directly in our text messages. So if I open my
Wow.
if I open my messenger, I can see, like, I feel like that's not safe to do.
No, it's not. And
Yeah.
first of all, you guys are not immigration lawyers.
Exactly.
They're not going to be able to get any kind of sound advice. And first of all, posting your information out there is absolutely not safe in
They
this
can
day
use
and
it
time.
against them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would be a little bit more cautious about how I communicate my problems to, or if I have an specific immigration question, who I pose that problem to, and how
Yeah.
I communicate that problem.
Yeah.
So my best recommendation is, no regular person. I mean, you could read forums and you can do all of that,
Mhm.
but the best advice is speaking to the right immigration attorney who specializes in the issue that you're dealing with.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I keep telling. If you have an issue like that, talk to an attorney, because if I'm an attorney, I'm not be running a meme page or like on an Instagram handle, or I'm an engineer.
And you're
I
not-
cannot answer them. They
Yeah.
keep typing. I feel bad for them because they type a very big message. I can see where they're coming from. They want some support from someone who knows this country a little better.
Right.
But at this point of time, even attorneys, after looking at their case, they take 2 or 3 sessions to understand
Mhm.
what's going on with their case.
Right.
So
And
I
every
always
case is different.
different.
There's
Yeah.
no generic advice you can get from Google or Chat GPT
Yeah.
for your case because
Yeah.
every situation is very case specific.
Exactly.
So you do need to talk to someone who is very much specializing in
Mm,
whatever it is that you're looking for or
exactly.
dealing with in that
Yeah.
moment,
Yeah.
So yeah.
And
Um,
delete all of those, because otherwise, like, it might be
yeah.
used in the immigration.
In the
They can look at
future,
it
right?
in
Well,
the
we know now
future.
that the government is going to be scrubbing.
Yeah.
People are scrubbing their social media
True.
because the government are looking at everything.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, it's not just the anti-Semitism or anything or pro-Palestinian support. It's a multiple things.
Yeah.
They're looking to see who will come in and follow the rules and how that person may be in their home country versus how they're who we don't know what the State Department guidelines are on
Exactly.
what they're looking for,
Yeah.
and they're not. We may not know,
Exactly.
unless we work for the State Department.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or we have
That's
someone
right,
who
right.
works for the State Department
Yeah.
to tell us specifically, no, we're not just looking for stuff that's related to Israel or Palestinian or this or that, or see what your position is on, on the war, or it's more than that.
Yeah. It's more than that.
It's
Yeah.
more than that.
Okay, so let's move on to H1B.
Yeah.
So there are like around 1.2, 1.8 million people, students coming internationally. For last 2 to 3 years, the number might be different,
Yeah.
but almost like 1 million students are coming in.
Yeah.
Versus we have
To 85.
85,000 H1B.
So the system is not set up to absorb the students.
Yes.
I think that's going back to what the students should plan for,
Mhm.
is taking that into consideration.
Yeah.
Because you're coming in, there's no guarantee that after your studies that you're going to get absorbed into the system and move from F1 to H1
Yes.
and then into the employment-based adjustment of status.
Yes.
There's absolutely no guarantee of that. So going back to what we talked about, I think students should be mindful that if you don't, so you have, we talked about this earlier, you had 3 chances
to
to
get your
right, while you're still a student on OPT to apply for the H1. Let's say worst case scenario, you didn't get picked.
yeah.
Then what do you do?
Exactly. They have to be prepared for that too.
You have to be prepared. I mean, your luck may not,
Favor.
yeah, exactly. Lady luck may not be on your side. So what do? You either, go back and continue your studies, right?
Yes.
Or what are
Leave
the
the
other
country.
options? Or you have to leave the country. Either way, you have to be. You cannot at any in stretch of the imagination violate the rules. I think the
Yes.
best thing to do is make sure you always ensure that your status is intact.
Intact. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that, or you could get married to a U.S. citizen
Yeah.
and
That's
get the
there.
green card in 1 year.
That's there.
I always tell my students that. I was like, look, H1 is not so great, but there's plenty of fishes out there
Yeah.
in the sea.
Yeah.
Go get one.
Yeah.
Find your soulmate.
Yeah.
Who's to say?
I know. Yeah.
So
Okay. So for people who don't know what H1B is, can you give a small
Yeah.
brief description?
Yeah. So an H1B is basically a non-immigrant visa. So it allows you to work for a specific company for a period of time, right? And it really depends on the employer. So if the employer has you working for 3 years, then your H1 will be valid for that time.
Yes.
So you're working. You have no right to move or to continue to do anything other than be a non-immigrant here. Basically, you don't have any rights as an H1. You're just here as a worker from a foreign country.
Yeah.
And you have to follow the rules, as you did in a student visa or as you did, in any kind of non-immigrant visa.
Yeah.
So you're subjected to the same so if you have to stay within the employment, and also you got to make sure that you have a legitimate employee-employee relationship, that you're getting paid from the employer, no third-party involvement. Make sure it's a genuine situation that, you have a job to go to, that you're doing, let's say you're a software engineer, you're doing your coding, whatever, and you're getting paid, in the right way from the employer that sponsored your H1B.
Yeah. And then even if you get laid off, you have to be here only for 60 days, right?
Yeah.
And
So that
leave.
doesn't give you a lot of time because, immigration backlog with everything. So even if you try to change your status, right? And you do a 539, which is a application to change your status, that takes what? Administrative processing takes a long time, right? So 60 days, what do? You go back to student, you get a new I-20, or you leave.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
Or
Yeah.
you get a new employer,
Mm.
essentially,
New
right?
employer,
And if
yeah.
you can't do any of those things, then if you can't get a new employer or you go back to student, what do? You leave. You have
Yes.
to,
Yes.
in order to make sure that there's no violation of, any kind, right?
Yeah.
So any violation, any overstay over 180 days is a problem.
Mm.
For generally speaking, I'm talking about for, well,
Any visa.
yeah, but like the H1s have their specific time, the
Okay.
other types of visa have their specific grace periods. But 180 days overstay is like almost like a ban,
Okay. You cannot come back again.
360. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything like that, trying to get a visa down the road
Mhm.
in the future is not going to be possible for you.
Yes.
So follow the rules, leave, and come
Yes.
back in the right way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there is any other, like there is L1 visa,
Mm-hmm.
which is like L1 visa is for managers,
Yeah,
right? And intercompany transfers.
Yeah.
A little bit about that so that people have option B.
Yeah,
not-
I think that's easier for people who are outside of the United States working for companies that are already like big companies who have branches in the United States, and like managers and executives who want to come here and work, and that company wants to sponsor them. That's a different tract,
Yes.
So
Yeah.
let's say you work for a company in India that has like a Bank of America, let's say hypothetically, Amazon, and they want to send you here because you're excellent executive and has been managing their operations there, and they want you here
Mhm.
in the New York operations.
Mhm.
That's an easy, because you're bringing them as an executive, and they can move through the process much faster
Yeah.
than an H1 process.
And even a green card for an L1 will be lot quicker when compared
Fast tracked,
to
complete
fast-tracked.
fast
Yeah.
track, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's better off, even if you're like we talked about this earlier, being a student, you go back to your home country, get your job, move up the ladder,
Exactly.
and come back and get your immigration, because we know the traditional H1 process for Indians particularly, not for the rest of the world, but for Indians or India and China, I think you guys are backlogged for like 14 years
Yes.
to get a green card.
True.
Now you're going to stay here essentially while this whole, priority date's 14 years to become
Yes.
current,
Yeah.
to even apply for it. By the time you get the green card, we're talking about maybe 15 to 20 years.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so what's the point of that?
I know, right? Yeah. So, and for people or for students or anyone like in India, I would suggest them to like if they want to come to this country, H1 is one way.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to become a manager or try to get to a state where they file your L1,
Absolutely.
and even they can do MBA in India itself, upgrade their skill, become a manager, and then come to this country on L1, which would be even smooth.
Agreed.
to
I think
go
that's
to
a
a green
smoother
card,
process,
then
easier process to get fast track to become, lawful in the United States, because we're talking about just maybe a year, just a couple of years.
Couple of years, yeah.
Not nothing like 20, So
True, yeah.
I mean, I think it's worth it. You could come to Harvard, get your MBA, go back to India, work for a top company in India,
Yeah.
and come back here as an executive.
Yeah.
That's
Not
easy.
only Harvard, any small,
I mean, I'm
any,
just
any
saying.
yeah. Half of them had a heart attack already saying Harvard. It's not Harvard, but yeah,
Okay.
any.
I'm just using
yeah.
Harvard because that
Yeah.
just came to my
Let's
mind.
use something small.
Okay, Rutgers
for us.
University.
Okay, all right, thank you. Even that's okay. Yeah,
Rutgers University or any university.
I can live with that.
Go get your MBA. Go
Yeah.
back to India. Get yourself sorted. Move out. Move out, man. And who
Yes.
knows? I think that's the better option. So. It's interesting though. Like a lot of people are now looking at other countries too for immigration, work based, and I
Yes.
think the rules are changing now because of what's happening with our administration. A lot of countries are more receptive to Indian students, and from what I'm hearing across the board
Exactly.
in Delhi,
Yeah.
people that I've spoken to, or any part of India, for example, they are looking at other countries more seriously
Yeah.
for their student visas, and where they will have a viable way to become lawful in that country.
UK is one of the
Australia,
destination.
Australia's big.
Canada these days it's not.
It's a little
it's
tricky with Canada. I know a lot of people are going to Europe.
Europe.
Yeah, Europe is there's a
Yeah.
different ways to do it in Europe. So it's explore your options.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's not US is not, I know everyone
The
wants to
only-
come. It used to be, sort of the American like way was the
Yeah.
best way.
I know.
But I don't know. I'm just in this, this time it's a little different feel, I think.
Yes. Yeah, completely. Okay, now pathway to green card.
Mhm.
Okay, there are categories EB1, EB2, and EB3.
Yes.
And
Yes.
EB5 is an investment base. So
Invest in visas.
let's
Yeah.
get a little
General.
general about
Right,
each of them.
right.
Can you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's start with like the EB3, the lowest, right? So those are your skilled people. Unskilled, skilled, depending on. So like generally people who don't really have a college degree as such, but they have a lot of experience. They would fall under EB3. So for example, like I've done mechanics under labor certs for mechanics under EB3.
Okay.
I've done it for people who are like those X-ray technicians. They have diplomas, but they don't have a college degree. And they have extensive experience. So EB3 for them. People
so for
like
non-Indians, how long does it take normally in that case?
I think they're pretty. I haven't looked at the visa bulletin, but I think it's pretty current for a lot of other countries.
Okay.
3 years.
Oh.
It's
a dream. It's a dream. Yeah.
Yeah. I
For
would
Indian
probably do it
nationals.
mostly for non-Indians
Okay,
because it makes more sense. Because it's like in a couple of years you'll have everything. The only issue for a lot of these people is maintaining your lawful status while their process is going through. So example, we file a perm, right? Like with the Department of Labor and I-140, it will take no time to get approved, but then the priority date will be there for like, let's say a non-Indian country would be about 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
So they still have to stay in lawful status until that. So
Until
usually it's a student visa or it's some other type of visa while they're waiting for that to
The status.
for the priority date to become current.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, the EB2s are the educated people, the technicians, the engineers, the IT guys, anyone with a advanced with a degree, right?
Yeah.
And then also the masters, that's also EB2, right?
EB2.
So
yeah.
EB3 could be either the degree people, right? And as well as the unskilled.
Some people at one point of time, what happened is EB3 priority date for Indians became lesser than EB2.
Right.
So people started changing
moving
their status to
yeah,
EB3 to get their green card faster.
So it's kind of the same, but the EB2 would be like people with a little bit more skilled, a little bit, with higher degrees, masters, maybe more experience that would qualify for like, more so for like a higher level of job exactly. So and then we have
EB1
yeah
category.
Those are your scientists, your your high skilled, really really notable professionals, like your doctors, your your high engineerings, like typically the people who function researchers, university professors,
if they do their PhD here.
Those are people with the extraordinary ability, essentially, will kind of fill that category. And the visa wait times is nothing, right? I mean, if we could look up the visa bulletin, you could probably pull that up and see.
It'll be around
probably
2 to 3 to 4 years probably
for their processing time. It's really for Indians also. It's very
it's
less.
The same thing.
It's very less. It's almost current, right?
Yeah,
like very close to being current.
And if you come to USA through L1 visa, they file it on EB1. This way, they get their green card faster.
And that's the whole fast track, because now you're basically executive, so you could go under that EB1 and you don't have to wait for anything. Long as the EB3 or EB2 process. That's true.
Yeah, so end of the day, it's a nightmare for Indian national to get a green card at this point.
If you look at the visa bulletin, it's a big difference, actually.
I think I have the stats somewhere, but I think
you could just put up the site. You could just go to
I'll put that.
The
it's
travel.gov website to pull up the visa bulletin, and it just shows the comparative difference between how long, like for Indian nationals and certain other, like the Chinese nationals, and then the rest of the world are in their own category, essentially. So if you come from Nepal, you have a better chance at moving from the H1B process into the green card process through employment. So that would be much faster for you.
On as of May 2025, EB2 wait time is 12 plus years for Indian nationals. EB2 category.
12 plus years. And what is it for the other?
I just have it for
you only
EB2
have it for these
because that's where most of our H1Bs and everyone
Right.
be.
Okay.
Yeah. So, they have to wait. And then
But that's quite a
investment.
long time, and that's just talking about waiting only for priority date. That's after they've gone through the H1
H1
process,
process.
after they've finished their
Mm.
perm process, after they filed the employers filed the I-140 for them,
Yeah.
and they're just waiting for the priority date of that.
Yeah.
That's still, so you're adding at least a couple of years to that.
Some of our relatives, they ask us, "Oh, you're in USA for like 5 to 10 years. Are you a citizen? Did you get your green card?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's a good joke."
How do you even
Yeah,
answer that question,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Like, to be honest, the
Um,
situation is more difficult than to explain.
True. Yeah.
You know.
So let's get into like humanitarian and asylum. Can you explain a little about them?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So asylum is basically if you come into the country and you file an application because you're afraid to go back to your home country, right? You're afraid of being persecuted in your home country. You're because of race, religion, membership in a particular social group, or you belong to a particular a different clan or a different group, in your country, and you're being persecuted because of that, gender being one of those,
Okay.
So there's five groups that can be basically looked upon for asylum, and then there's social group that could be extended to any group, but you have to prove that you've been persecuted by your government.
Okay.
Or even if you're persecuted or harmed by a private citizen, you have to prove that the government did nothing to help you.
Okay.
That if you go back there, your life would be in danger.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So the kind of evidence that you require for an asylum case is a very high amount of evidence, right? You
Okay.
need substantial evidence to prove that case.
Mhm.
So coming to the United States, a lot of Indians say, "Oh well, I have trouble with, let's say, because I belong to a certain caste, or I belong to a certain religion in India, and
Yeah.
I'm being persecuted." Well, what is persecution? How are you being persecuted? What did the government do? How were they involved?
Yeah.
What kind of proofs do you have for that persecution? So all of this is very important to prove persecution,
Okay.
And if you don't have that, the likelihood of winning an asylum case is very,
Very
low.
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you want to come prepared if that's you ever, like, for example, let's say you have, you're transgender in India, and we know, like, our society, Indian society, kind of looks
Good.
down on that, right?
Yeah.
If you have sufficient evidence to support it, I've been able to win a couple of cases like that,
Okay.
for Indians who were gay and had come to the United States because they were harmed and they were
Okay.
harassed and they were tortured back in the home country. And if you have that situation and you come here, just make sure you have all that evidence to prove it, because it's,
It's gonna.
it's going to
Yeah.
work
Okay.
in that situation.
Okay.
It's worked for me in the past because I've
Okay.
done it
Mhm.
a few times and I've had so much success with it. So,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. And any other visas like this?
So there's the U visa.
Okay.
The U visa is if you're in the United States, for example, right? You go into so you're a victim of a crime. You go into a grocery store and there's a robbery going on in a grocery store, and you're there, but the person who's robbing the grocery store basically holds that gun against you and threatens you. Like,
Okay.
I'm gonna kill you if they don't give me the register. Then you're
Okay.
part of that,
Okay.
right? So
Yes.
you're a victim of
Okay.
a crime in that
Okay.
instance, and also you're gonna help the police to solve that crime because you're obviously a witness as
Yeah.
well. So you're a victim and you're a witness.
Yes.
So you're going to give evidence to the police. You're going to give testimony to the police that, this person did this to me. I had a gun pointing at me, and they need you in order to convict that criminal.
Okay.
So because of that involvement, you basically can get what's a U visa. So basically, a victim of a crime is entitled to relief. And basically what that does, as of right now, if you have a sufficient case where you were harmed, you were not only a victim of a crime, but you had to be harmed. And now the harm doesn't mean, let's say he shot the gun and you got shot.
Yeah.
That's a harm, right? That's
Yes,
a
yes.
clear cut,
Yeah.
black and white, But it could be a mental one where
Okay.
you've had sleepless nights. You're traumatized
True.
by the events. You can't function in daily life. You have night, bad dreams. You wake up in the middle of the night.
Okay.
That's all part of a harm, right? That's a
Okay.
mental harm.
Okay.
So that's enough as well.
So if you're in a mall and there is some shooting happening on top floor and you're on the ground floor, and then there is a CCTV which you can prove that you were in the mall when this was happening,
Well,
and you were traumatized. for
Right. Well, you would
Will
know
that
it's very general, but it has to be more like in that case, because if it's a mall and everybody's getting shot, it might be a little trickier because
Okay.
it's a huge space, right?
Yeah.
So are the police going to be using you to help them to find these criminals, right? The shooters.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you going to be cooperating with the police to solve this crime? Because remember, in a U visa case, the police department has to sign off on a certification that you're actually assisting them in
Oh.
assisting
Okay.
them in solving the
Yeah,
crime.
crime.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Uh,
So in a
I
mall
can.
case, I still think you can get it,
Mm-hmm.
but obviously it's going to be all in the news, and if
Yes.
you're
Yes.
going through
Yes.
and people are running for their lives and there's a stampede going
Yeah.
on, yeah,
It can
that's
be.
emotional harm,
Okay.
I would say.
Okay.
So,
Once I know this scenario where there was some shooting happening outside. One of my friend was in a restaurant, and then there was some shooting happening, and then
right,
they had to run behind the bar, and they had to hide there because
right. Mhm.
some random shooting was happening on the street. In this case, they were not involved. It was happening on the street. They went and they were hiding.
Mhm.
Will that be considered? What do you think? It's very tricky,
It's
right?
very tricky with that
Yeah.
one because
Yeah.
now you're looking to see, well, how were you? Okay, so you were somewhat of a victim, but not directly a victim.
Mm.
This shooting was not in the
In the
restaurant.
restaurant.
It was outside the
Yeah.
restaurant. You were not a target,
Mm.
so you really, in that context, is not considered a victim.
Okay.
But I mean, case by case.
Case by
Look,
case.
you'd have to
Yeah.
look at the facts. You'd have to look at the police report.
Yeah.
I mean, in some cases, you can kind of stretch it, but
Yes.
for the most part,
I
you
have.
must be the direct victim.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I have even trickier question. I'll just bother you with one more thing.
That's okay.
A person is working, like he's not supposed to be working in a store.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then he's just working for he's not working there legally
Mm-hmm.
with his status, and then he's a victim of a crime in that
Mhm.
state. What happens? So if he files something, it'll say you're not supposed to be working over there. Will that? How does that work at that point?
I understand what you're saying because a lot of times people on other types of visas, like for example, the students will work
Students.
at stores and
Yes,
stuff,
and
right?
then they get.
Right. But the U visa, remember, it's a humanitarian category,
Mm,
and it's basically handled in a special unit,
Okay.
usually at the Vermont Service Center.
okay.
And people don't really have access to the records of U visas, because it's a very sort of specialized area and
Okay.
sensitive area.
Okay.
So in those cases, I think it's important. And I think, for the most part, immigration law in the context that it's been written overlooks that violation because it's more important in the greater good of the public that the person serve as a witness
Okay.
than worry about his visa status.
visa
And then he
status and all that.
disappears. And
Yeah.
how are we going to catch the criminals, right?
Understood.
So I
Okay.
think in that context, it's
Okay.
best to report the crime and make sure that you cooperate with the police.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So let's get into ICE rates. Yes,
My
that's
favorite
that's
topic.
I know. I know these days. Yeah. So what should you do if ICE is knocking on your doors?
Okay. I think for the most part, if ICE comes to your door, you know that one, mostly you have a deportation order.
Mhm.
Two, either you have been arrested and charged with a criminal offense
Yeah.
that's deportable.
Mhm.
Usually something higher than like a misdemeanor, so some sort of a felony, like any type of assault charges, any type of drug related matters,
Yes.
any kind of charges relating to injury of someone else or property or things like that. You have to be mindful. So serious crimes, right? Manslaughter, things like that, obviously.
Yeah.
So very serious crimes, that you're going to be on the radar. So ICE will obviously either get you into court or get you at your home or wherever they need to
True.
get you. So
Yeah.
you can't hide very long.
Yeah.
And the other type of people that ICE are now looking for are people who've just entered the country unlawfully
Yeah.
in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So basically, those people are subject to they're basically considered arriving aliens.
Mhm.
So ICE now, if they haven't shown up to court or they have a deport order or anything, or even if they just are, ICE can basically remove anyone considered arriving alien. They don't need to go in front of a judge.
Okay.
They don't have any right to go in front of a judge if you're charged as an arriving alien.
Okay.
And these are typical people who were allowed to come into the country in the last 2 years.
Mm.
So those are the priority cases for removal.
Mm.
But let's just say hypothetically, ICE is looking for someone else. You happen to be in that apartment or in that house.
And you don't have a valid visa.
Yeah, you don't have a valid visa. You should be concerned
They should be
because
concerned.
they're taking everyone.
Okay.
Collateral. They may
Yes.
not be looking for you, Vish, but
Okay.
but they're looking for someone else.
and then you're in the
you're
wrong
in
place
there,
and
so
wrong
you're
time.
going down. So here's the thing with that. Just make sure that you always ask, because no one, not even police, not even ICE, can come into your home without a valid warrant, right? And we know that a warrant is not just a warrant signed by ICE. It has to be signed by a judge. So it has to be basically and have the signature of a judge, and underneath you have the type name of the judge.
Okay.
So that's the way to verify it.
Okay.
I try to trick people and just pass in some papers under the door. And a lot of people, obviously, who don't speak, read, and write English, have trouble deciphering whether it's a valid warrant or not.
Okay.
But for the most part, people could understand, I need to get a valid warrant.
Okay.
Do not answer any questions to them. Don't give any information. Ask to speak to an attorney, okay? If you're ever caught by ICE in ICE custody in the public or wherever, and then once you ask for that, you always have a right to a bond hearing. If you've never been in the court proceedings before, you have the right to speak to an attorney. You have a right to a bond hearing. Do not sign any documentation that will cause you to have an expedited removal. Because ICE can easily tell you to sign something and you don't know what you're signing, because obviously you think you're cooperating with them.
Okay.
And they will say, if you cooperate with me, we're going to let you go. But then you sign away your rights to go in front of an immigration judge, and you don't want to do that. Okay. So you want to be mindful. It's best not to sign anything, refuse to sign, or just say, I'd rather speak with my attorney before I sign any documentation or anything.
Okay.
And, just be mindful of all of that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then let's conclude it with one question.
Sure.
Can you give us some real-time success stories or some lesser-known pathway to get a green card for Indians? Basically, we have like very limited. Even in India, there are like multiple types of visas. They come either as a student or Do you know any other real?
Well, there's there's a few options, right? So we talked about humanitarian. We touched on the U. There's also something called the VAWA.
Okay.
Have you heard of VAWA?
No.
It's Violence Against Women's Act.
Okay.
It doesn't just mean women.
Okay.
It means men too.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So that's another way. Let's say you get married to someone, right? And that marriage doesn't work out. People think, oh my God, now that person is not going to be able to, I'm never going to be able to get a green card because this marriage is bad. But in that marriage, if you could really look at it and see, have you been the victim of violence in that marriage? Have you been the victim of extreme cruelty in that marriage?
Okay.
Have you been subjected to, has that person basically said, oh, you just married me for a green card, I'm going to have you deported? Things like that. Extreme cruelty amounts to, the way people speak to you, the psychological effect that, that person, the harm that they cause to you may not always be physical, but it could be mental.
Okay.
So marriage-based cases, sometimes if you get married and it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean it's the end of it.
Okay.
You should speak to a reputed attorney to find out whether you have a possibility for filing a VAWA case.
Okay. And then what is the status of them? Can an immigrant file it? If two immigrants
well, you
are
have
in
to
this
have
country?
you have to have a lawful marriage, right, to an American citizen or a green card holder.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
There has to be so
not if two immigrants who are married in different country file this, it doesn't work like
that's
that.
not
It
going
works
to work.
only for
Citizens or green card holders.
Okay.
Or if you have a partnership here, we talked about the U visa. So domestic violence under New Jersey law would qualify for a U visa. So let's say you're living with someone, right? And you both are on student visa, but there's a domestic violence situation, then one party would be able to, apply for a U visa if that person
If
is
it's
subject
proved.
to, right,
yeah.
proven
Okay.
and subject to battery.
Okay.
So the VAWA cases are another way. A lot of people are not aware. They think that after my marriage, if my marriage fails, that's it. I've got to go back. I may not have. But if you have been the victim of extreme cruelty, mental cruelty, and harm, any kind of physical harm by the American citizen green card holder, then you should talk to an attorney. Maybe you'll qualify for a VAWA case.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that's one of the ways, and I've been able to successfully do quite a bit of VAWA cases over the past couple of years, and they're very good cases, humanitarian cases where that you're really helping someone with a valid situation to stay lawfully in the United States.
Okay.
Here's another way. a lot of our people who get married, right, and
Mhm.
come into the United States, let's say you're a green card holder
Yeah.
and you go, I mean, you marry someone in India and you bring that person here into the United States,
Mm-hmm.
that marriage falls apart, right?
Yes.
There's no guarantee marriages,
Yeah.
last forever.
Yeah.
That marriage falls apart, but that person's here and dependent on you. So
Okay.
they've come here
Mhm.
on, basically a temporary visa, right?
Mhm.
Because you have a temporary green card if it's the
Right.
marriage is less than
Yeah.
2 years. And if you decide to get divorced and, there's for whatever reason, so
Mhm.
battery or extreme hardship or something, there are grounds for that person to continue to stay in the United States,
Okay.
based on a 751 petition to remove conditions. And that's something that's obviously your first green card, and then you remove that on on a petition. A
Okay.
751 is a petition to remove conditions
Okay.
based on different grounds, like the domestic violence, like the hardship, and like based on divorce for whatever reasons.
Okay.
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 So you don't just have to
That's
pack
fine.
your bags and leave. There are
Okay.
ways
There
to
are
stay.
ways to stay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much for
Oh,
your
it was
time. And then
fun.
we have completed so many things. This is just a generic
Yeah.
outline. Let's do another session,
Yeah.
deeping, with a deep dive of every visa types and all that.
Yes,
later on.
definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and-
definitely. We could do that.
Yeah.
And have definitely let me know, what specifically that we can, be helpful for the audience to hear about.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
They'll definitely put it in the comment section, and then we can go ahead and
Okay.
cover that. Yeah.
Yes, and people, please do not post legal questions to
To
this.
anyone. Yeah.
Especially your personal problems, because
Right.
that, again, that could turn around and it affect you in the future. So
True.
don't do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
All right,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Yes.
Yeah.